Today I wanted to talk about something that's been making the rounds for a few days now, and it's caused quite a bit of conversation among those of us who closely follow everything the boys do. I'm talking about the scene where Jimin puts his foot very close to Jungkook's face. Some saw it as a funny moment or even something tender, but if we look at Jungkook's reaction, he didn't seem to enjoy it at all. And I understand that sometimes among friends there are jokes, games, or spontaneous situations that can seem funny, but this time that wasn't the case. Jungkook's discomfort was quite clear. Just by seeing his expression, you can tell he wasn't amused. And most importantly, this kind of thing shouldn't be overlooked, just because it comes from someone close or because it's in front of a camera. Something else that's important to remember is that this isn't the first time Jimin has had this kind of attitude with Jungkook. In the first episodes of Are You Sure, when they were in New York, there was a moment where Jimin used a napkin he'd wiped his face with and held it up to Jungkook's face. Although it may seem like a minor detail, it's part of a pattern that some of us are starting to find uncomfortable, because friendly play is one thing, and crossing personal boundaries is another, even if it's all within a program or under the supervision of a company. What many people sometimes forget is that even if they're following a script or an image defined by their contracts, gestures still have a real impact. And Jungkook, no matter how professional he is still a person with boundaries, with emotions, and who deserves the same respect as anyone else. Now, I want us to think about something that contrasts sharply with that: the way Taehyung relates to Jungkook. And I'm not saying this from an idealized place or as a fan exaggerating what they see. I'm talking about what's noticeable on camera, what they project in small actions. Taehyung has always shown a very different way of treating Jungkook. Although he's older than him, he never uses that age difference as an excuse to joke around in an invasive way. On the contrary, he gives him space, respects him, and even in the closest moments, cares for him. Returning to the topic of Jimin, what's bothering me isn't just what he did, but how part of the public celebrates it as if it were something funny or romantic, when it clearly wasn't. And the most worrying thing is that they completely ignore how Jungkook felt. Not everything that happens between members of a group should be seen as fan service or entertainment content. There are times when we simply need to acknowledge that someone isn't comfortable, and that should be enough to stop such actions. I understand that many of the things we see are edited, guided, or even imposed by the company. But that doesn't justify normalizing behaviors that, in any other context, would be considered disrespectful. No matter how many years of friendship you've had, or how many stages you've shared, it doesn't matter how many times you've been friends, or how many times you shared, it doesn't matter how many times you shared a stage. Respect should never be conditioned by fame or closeness. And this is precisely what makes the relationship between Taehyung and Jungkook stand out even more. Because despite the time, the tours, and the changes in their lives, they have maintained that pristine way of caring for each other. Sometimes it's minimal gestures, a look or a word spoken at the right moment, but they show that what exists between them isn't part of a script. In the end, what happened in that scene with Jimin shouldn't be minimized. Not because we want to generate controversy, but because making that kind of discomfort visible also protects the integrity of those we admire. Jungkook deserves to be surrounded by people who value him, not only as an artist, but as a human being. And that includes being respected even when the cameras are rolling. Taehyung recently went live. It was a short-lived, but it still felt meaningful. He looked tired, as if he'd just had a long day. He didn't say much, but his face spoke volumes. Still, having him live is always appreciated, even when he's quieter. He seemed different, as if he had something on his mind or was simply disconnected from the moment. Some started to comment that maybe he was like that because of his schedule, which has been busy lately. But other theories also emerged, because just before, Jimin and Jungkook had done a live together. During that broadcast, there were some things that caught our attention. Jimin, as always, had a moment when he crossed a line by mentioning that Jungkook and Taehyung exercised together. He said it in a light-hearted tone, but it was one of those comments that didn't seem part of the plan. Jungkook barely heard him and reacted. He looked at him with a very clear face, as if to say, that wasn't meant to be shared here. It wasn't an awkward moment, but it was one of those that leaves you thinking. It was clear to many of us that it wasn't something he wanted to be known in that way. It wasn't a big deal, but there are things they prefer to keep to themselves. Jimin mentioning that part of their shared routine didn't change anything between them, but it did expose something they probably prefer to keep low-key. Those moments are theirs, and when they decide to show them, they'll do it their way. It wasn't a coincidence that Taehyung appeared shortly after Jimin and Jungkook's live. It was like a calm response, without needing to say much. But his expression said he was processing something, or maybe he was just exhausted. Seeing them both active, albeit separately, continues to make it clear that they're doing well. The connection between them doesn't need public displays to remain evident. What's important is what they share privately, not what others try to expose without their consent. Gestures like mentioning a routine they do together reveal that their relationship remains strong, even when they don't put it front and center. Jungkook's reaction was discreet, but very clear. And that says a lot about how much he values what he experiences with Taehyung. He doesn't need grand gestures to let it show. With just that look, he reminded us that there are things that, even if they aren't shared, are there, intact. Taehyung, for his part, didn't make any direct reference to any of that. He just appeared, stayed for a few minutes, and closed the live. In his own style, calm, without explanations. His way of showing himself was different, but he's still him. Maybe it wasn't because of the previous live. Maybe he just needed to disconnect for a moment and say hello to fulfill that closeness he maintains with those who follow him. At the end of the day, seeing them was enough. Although they didn't appear together on screen, they were both present, and that was enough to feel that, in their own way, they continue to share more than what they let on. For many people, the close gestures between two entertainment idols may seem like a script, a planned performance to satisfy their fans. However, a closer look at the relationship between Taehyung and Jungkook reveals elements that go beyond acting or spectacle. There's a consistency in their gestures, a naturalness in their interactions, and an emotional depth that doesn't seem scripted. When they're together, Taehyung and Jungkook display a unique way of relating. It's not just physical proximity, which could be explained as camaraderie between bandmates. It's an interaction that involves prolonged eye contact, gentle gestures, and constant signs of mutual care. The glances they exchange aren't casual or forced, they're intentional, sustained, and loaded with meaning. These glances, accompanied by spontaneous smiles, speak for themselves. On multiple occasions, both have demonstrated that their closeness doesn't depend on the environment. Whether in interviews, concerts, rehearsals, or casual moments, the way they relate to each other remains unchanged. This suggests that their bond isn't a public strategy, but rather an authentic connection, developed over time. Over the years, from their debut to the present, the evolution of their relationship has been evident to those who follow their journey. What began as a friendship between bandmates has transformed into a deep and meaningful bond, based on trust, loyalty, and mutual understanding. One notable aspect is how they silently accompany each other. They don't always need words to communicate. Often, a glance is enough for the other to react, as if they share a nonverbal code that only they understand. This form of communication isn't learned or rehearsed, it's the product of a connection built on mutual knowledge, constant observation, and shared affection. Their body language also reinforces this idea. Jungkook tends to appear more energetic, while Taehyung conveys serenity. However, when they're together, their energies balance each other. There's an evident synchronicity in their movements and attitudes. The small touches, the gestures of support, the smiles shared in spontaneous moments, everything contributes to that feeling that what they share goes beyond a traditional friendship. They don't need to explicitly confirm anything. The nature of their relationship isn't defined by labels or public statements. What matters is what's perceived from their actions. People who observe them closely can notice that their bond is strong and constant. In some cases, attempts are made to discredit the closeness between public figures, arguing that it may all be part of a fabricated narrative. However, Taehyung and Jungkook's behavior doesn't follow the patterns of predictable performance. Their interaction is variable and authentic, with moments of silence, play, support, and care. This variability lends credibility, as it reflects a real relationship, with nuances and spontaneity. Their bond has withstood the constant exposure and scrutiny of millions of people. Despite being questioned many times, their attitude hasn't changed. They haven't distanced themselves, nor have they changed the way they relate to each other. This indicates a conscious decision to remain close, regardless of what others may interpret. And that, in itself, represents a form of commitment. The way they care for each other is also remarkable. In moments when one seems tired, the other acts with consideration. They have been captured on multiple occasions adjusting their clothes, wiping their faces, or simply making sure the other is okay. These are everyday gestures that don't usually get a spotlight, but when repeated constantly, they end up revealing a pattern of mutual care.